thank you. This is the Rotary Club of World Disability Advocacy. And by the way, Maureen, I'd love to get in touch with you again. So we're going to set something up. So I'm the president of the Rotary Club of World Disability Advocacy. We are dedicated to the human rights of people with disabilities on a global level, working on many different projects. If anybody's ever interested in finding out more about us, you can do so by writing to Rotarywda. I hope I got it right. Did I get it right this time, John? Rotary? No. Okay. What is it, John?
I'm just trying to think what the heck it is myself. Hold on.
Oh, I think it's rotarywda@gmail.com. I think somehow in the last month I lost the focus on that email address, but rotarywda. And we're in this group we have today. We got Jeremy Opperman, who is going to be our speaker. We'll talk about Jeremy in a second. And he's from South Africa. We've got Masenga from Malawi. We've got Maureen from Uganda. We've got John from Ireland. We've got Constance from Las Vegas. And we've got Amy from Chicago, USA. We've got Nalish from India. So it's a small group, but it's a nice international group here. So, and our speaker today is Jeremy Opperman. If you haven't heard Jeremy Opperman speak, you're in for a treat. Jeremy and I have known each other for a couple of years now. We won't get into the story, but it's just by chance you and I got together and have been working ever since. And he is on the DEI Committee of Rotary International, which is a very important position to be on. So it's good to have him here with us. And I'm going to turn it over to Jeremy. Jeremy has had a history of working with the guide dogs. And guide dogs have been in the news a little bit lately, or service dogs, because of the fact that there are a little bit of controversies with them, but very basically we need to know about guide service dogs, Jeremy. I think there's a lack of knowledge on that. So I'm going to turn this over to you and look forward to your presentation.
Thank you.
I'm going to spotlight you. It's all yours, Jeremy.
Well, thank you, Ken. And it's good to be back. And hello all. So yeah, my name is Jeremy Opperman. I'm blind. I have a condition called RP, retinitis pigmentosa, and it's one of those conditions which is it deteriorates over years. And I'm now at 60. I am essentially almost totally blind. I say almost because I have a little bit of light perception, depending on the light, and just, depending on my perception. And so one of the interesting things about visual impairment is that there's a lot of misinformation, a lot of misunderstanding about it. Many people still look at blindness or visual impairment as a binary, meaning either off or on, light or dark, blind or not. And it absolutely isn't like that. You know, of the 285 million people in the world who are legally blind, only about 15% of them are absolutely, totally blind with no light perception at all. And the rest have some vision. It could just be light perception. Up to about 20% of people are legally blind with no or very little vision. The other 80 have some vision, so they have what's called low vision, and that lowness can be very relative to conditions, to the light conditions. It could be tunnel vision, it could be peripheral vision, depending on the kind of condition. There are many kinds of visual impairment. And I'm saying this because it's important that we get this, because so many people dumb the whole disability, the whole blindness thing down and want to think of it as either yes or no, black or white, on or off, and it really isn't like that. And so when I my vision, so I've had poor vision all my life. I was born with RP. I've had very poor vision all my life. So, but it meant that when I was a boy, I could ride a bicycle, but I would never have been able to drive a car. I could read, but I wouldn't have been able to, as long as it was large print, but I wouldn't have been able to read a telephone book or a newspaper. I could see the mountain. I live in Cape Town, and if you might know this, but we have a beautiful mountain in the middle of the city, and you know, it's only a mile and a half away from me where I'm sitting now. So, you know, I could see that mountain all my life until last year, interestingly, when it just suddenly disappeared and just no longer there. So that low vision is a very interesting subject which is not understood. And if anyone's interested, I'm reading an outstanding book at the moment, which only came out in July this year by a man called Andrew Leland. So that's Andrew, and then Leland is Leland. And the book is called The Country of the Blind. And it's certainly the most intelligent book on blindness I've ever read, because it goes into the issues around low vision and the loss of vision over years. So when I got to about 20 something, there's a thing about many of us with low vision, is that we often pretend we can see more than we can. And so when I was at university and a little bit about a few years after university, I still didn't use a white cane, and I ran around like a mad thing, invariably bumping into things, which is why I have no hair in front of me, in front of my forehead or on top of my head, because that's from banging into things over the years. And it's one of those silly things that we need to come to a point where you actually have to admit to yourself that you actually need to have help. Help being learning, mobility, and instruction. You know, mobility instruction is called orientation and mobility instruction, which means ultimately learning to getting a cane. And so I was 28 years old when I was 26 years old, sorry, when I beg your pardon, when I first started using a cane. And it was wonderful. I mean, I felt like Moses. Every time I waved my cane around, the people would part in front of me when I would walk. And that worked for a while. And then my vision started deteriorating quite fast. And it was in November, and I'll never forget, 19th of November, 2007, was when I finally arrived at Guide Dog Association here in Cape Town. Now, I must just wind back about a year before that. In fact, a year and a half before that, I had put my name down to get a guide dog. And all over the world, there is this problem, less in America, but anywhere else in the world, there is this problem of a waiting list to get a dog. And in our country, it's over 2 years sometimes. Anyway, I put my name down in 2005, I think at the end of 2005, or maybe it was early 2006, but by November 2007, they said, you can come in, you have a dog, come in for training. Now, training is where you arrive and you literally clear your diary for a month, and you live in the center for 2 weeks. And then you go home, and then for the next 2 weeks, it's called domiciliary training, and a trainer comes and visits you at home twice a day to walk with you at your home so that you can practice the routes that you'll be using for the dog. And so it was on the 19th of November in 2007, and I'm sitting on this bed in this little room, feeling very out of it, and uncertain about what's going to happen. And I hear the scrabble of paws and claws in the passageway outside. And in comes this enormous golden retriever. And he came straight up to me. He didn't sniff around, he walked straight up to me. And I met my very first guide dog, Barkley, spelt not like the bank, spelt Barklee. And I tell you about him coming to me because that seems to be a thing. I don't know how they know, but it's almost a thing where they kind of guess that you're it, because there were 4 of them, and they were all released in the passageway, and each one went to a separate room. Obviously, they were somewhat encouraged, but the fact is that he came to me and we became friends. And it was the most extraordinary 2 weeks of my life, learning to put my trust in this dog. And so what having a guide dog or learning to use a guide dog entails is there's a lot of theory. You need to learn a bit of theory around dog care, the law, a little bit about what the law says, where you can go, where you can't go, basic husbandry in terms of looking after an animal, and then literally practicing lots and lots of walking. We literally walk 10 kilometers a day. Well, okay, if you like, 4 miles a day odd. And it was wonderful. And, you know, there is some extraordinary, let me tell you a little bit about how they are trained. And so a guide dog is taken at a young age, at the age of about 6-8 weeks. And he's obviously been identified as a puppy, as a potential guide dog by the organization, by breeders. And he goes to what's called school. And he lives at home. No, sorry, I beg your pardon. He gets selected and he goes to a home, what's called a puppy raiser. And the family in the home bring him up until he's about, now it used to be about 12 to 14 months. Now it's gone to 16 to 18 months old. And he lives in that home with the family, preferably with children, and they bring him up. They in turn have to come and they need to learn. So they come for courses and they come to classes. And essentially that family is bringing up the dog with a sort of curriculum in mind to socialize the animal, make him friendly, make sure he likes children, doesn't worry about loud noises. They encourage him. They're allowed to go into shopping centers. They wear a little jacket that says, when I grow up, I'm going to be a guide dog. And they wear a little jacket that's got a big L on it, like a learner's driver's license or a learner's driver. And they get to go to parks and shops and things, some places that normal dogs can't go because of that jacket. And they learn to walk up escalators and things. And so they get socialized to prepare them for big school. And when they get to about 14 months, 16 months old, they go to school and they're bored. On the weekends, they go home to their old puppy raising family, and they go to school and they work hard for 6 months. They learn to be a guide dog, and it's hard work for them, you know, because they've got to learn to wear a harness. That takes some work. Then they've got to learn to walk with the harness using the trainers, and so they learn that their right shoulder now is much wider. And so they learned that they must pass things by with a big margin on the right so that the user holding the harness will not hit something like a doorway or a pole or something. And so they skirt obstacles. If they're going left around the obstacle, they make sure there's a lot of clearance between the dog and the thing so that you as the person doesn't hit it. So the harness is a leather harness, and they use different materials around the world, but in South Africa we still use a beautifully made leather harness made by saddlers who make saddles, and attached to it is a articulated metal U bar, if you like. It's made of light aluminium and it's in a U shape and it's got a plastic sleeve over it, and the person holds that. I say articulated because it's hinged in a sense that you can drop it down on the back of the dog or you can pick it up. So it articulates up and down. And because it's made of metal, it's rigid, you see. So it gives you have a direct communication with the dog. You can feel the dog moving up and down when you're holding this thing. And so in training, we get to hold that with our left hand. And then numerous commands and things you need to learn: forward, stop, back, left, right, very much like a remote control. And the dog, of course, has now been taught over months and months to do various very clever things. And one of the things is, for instance, you're walking along the sidewalk and the dog is taught to stop on the up curb, meaning the sidewalk just before the road begins. And he stops dead. And you as the user then need to say, okay, when you perceive that it's safe to cross the road, the dog doesn't look for the cars and then say you can cross. The dog crosses when you tell the dog to cross. If a car should suddenly appear and bear down upon you, the dog is trained to jump away, dragging you away. That's a theory. I don't really want to push it to the test, mind you. Anyway, so the dog stops dead. Now think about that. To teach a dog, also, by the way, to walk in a straight line. You'd be surprised how hard that is, apparently, to teach a dog. Dogs don't, in fact, walk in straight lines. They tend to quarter. They go left to right and left to right, left to right. But to teach a dog in a straight line takes some doing, apparently. And then also to teach it to stop at that curve is a neat trick. And the funny part is when we learn initially, we always, as people, as humans, holding on to the dog, we overshoot the pavement or the sidewalk, the up curb, because we're not actually, we're not aware yet when the pavement is coming. So that's in a nutshell a little bit about how we train. And there are many, there are many tricks and many techniques one learns. There's obviously commands and things you need to learn. And there are protocols and when you can cross and you listen carefully and you use your traffic lights, and there are techniques. And as I said, the dog does not cross the road when he thinks you should cross the road. We tell the dog to cross the road. So there's still a great deal of responsibility on the blind person doing the crossing. One of the things, of course, that we taught is that you may take the dog in my country, you can take the dog in just about anywhere. The only place you may not take the dog is in a mosque or a Muslim-owned business, because there is a cultural issue. Dogs are not seen as particularly clean in Muslim culture. And so there's a matter of respect. We don't go into Muslim-owned businesses unless we ask permission. Alternative to that, we can go just about anywhere. I'll tell you a little bit about what happens and do's and don'ts around that. But in the interim, so in training, we literally go to shops, we go to malls, we go to have a hamburger, we have a milkshake somewhere, go up escalators, down escalators. They love escalators, the dogs. Go into elevators, and anywhere, absolutely. And so, for 2 weeks we do this, and at the end of the day, we have a little test. And we've got to walk independently without a trainer near us, and we've got to do a couple of things, and we've got to graduate, essentially. And the dog is feeling terribly proud of themselves. And that's essentially the dog training. Now, I must tell you, in those days, in 2007, I was at the height of my career, the earlier part of my very busy career. I still am a consultant. Doing disability awareness work and disability inclusion work. And I had some very big projects around 2007 right through to 2014. And my first dog, Barkley, changed my life. Quite, and I know that's a cliche, but it truly changed my life. My independence shot up. I was able to, I've always caught a taxi or found a driver to take me to the airport, and then drop me off. And then I would catch the plane to Johannesburg or Durban or Bloemfontein, our 3 other big cities. And then when there, I would look for, I would have arranged for someone to fetch me. Uber didn't exist in those days. And then we developed a wonderful train line in Johannesburg, which went from Johannesburg to Pretoria. And it started from the airport. And that was a wonderful breakthrough for me. And so I was able to catch every now and again, what I would do is I'd walk up to my station, which is about 2 kilometers away, then catch the train to Cape Town, then walk over to the bus terminus, which would take me to the airport, catch the bus, go to the bus to the airport, find information so that they could guide me to the airline counter, because as smart as these dogs are, they can't read. So finding the airline counter is a little tricky. So you get somebody to guide you to the airline counter. Once there, then you're okay. You booked your ticket already, one hopes. and you get a ticket, and then meet and assist, which is a universal thing all around the world. Meet and assist guide you to where you need to be at the gateway. And to fly, we board the plane like anyone else, and we roll the dog up into a little ball and stuff him under the seat in front of us. And I know that sounds improbable, particularly since my first dog, Barkley, was a 48-kilogram golden retriever. So that's a big dog. That's a 100-pound dog. That, and you'd be amazed how small they can fold themselves up. And I would literally, he would curl up in a little ball, and I would use my feet and kick him under the seat in front of me. I don't really mean kick, but you know what I mean. And he would lie there for the 2 hours it would take to fly to Johannesburg. And then when we land, I would encourage him out, and then we left the plane. And so I broke something of a record in this country because I was particularly busy. And between 2007, well, actually, that was November, so I didn't fly much that year. So from 2008 to 2014, or 2013, actually, no, 2014, I beg your pardon, I flew with Barkley 450 times. And I can tell you, in all 450 flights, those are all internal flights, by the way, I didn't fly overseas with him. In all 450 flights, I never had a single problem from the airlines. Or the airport companies for that matter. Sadly, I must tell you, in 2015, the wheels came off somewhat. And due to an increase of illicit drug trafficking around the world, some bright spark decided to insert drugs within the harness of a guide dog somewhere in the world. I have no idea where. And as a result of that, the world clamped up a lot on guide dog travel. Not that we couldn't do it, it's just that the security measures were stepped up like never before, and it became rather unpleasant to fly. There were a lot more hoops to jump through, there was a lot more red tape, a lot more notice needed to be given. But in those 6 years, I had the most extraordinary freedom. The dog provided me with the most independence I've ever had in my life, being able to travel independently. Even if I didn't fly, I would catch the train and go into town and see clients or see friends or do whatever I needed. Then in 2015, I was asked to create a disability desk at our province, in our province. And so I started, they were a client of mine, and then they became my only client. And so for all intents and purposes, they were my actual employer, and I would commute, and I went in every day. By then, Barkley was getting quite old. And so I retired him at the end of 2015 and got another dog called Gatsby, who lived up to his name because he was particularly naughty. He didn't last long, sadly, because after a couple of years he went on strike. Never quite worked out why. And a very funny thing, one of the things that he did actually was, I was having lunch with the CEO of our largest blind organization in the country. And as we were walking into the restaurant, I felt through the harness, the handle, holding the handle, I felt the dog's head snap to the side and back again. You can actually feel the movement. And I, of course, didn't see what happened. But the CEO of this large blind organization got a fright of her life because the dog had quietly just literally inhaled somebody's hamburger on their plate. And so he was not without being naughty, this dog. And so sadly, I had to retire him early because one day he decided not to work properly. And this is the thing we must remember. At the end of the day, these are not machines. These are dogs. They have personalities, they have temperaments, they have foibles, they get ill, and more on that later. And so I then, they found me another dog, actually surprisingly fast. And I got my third guide dog, Ronnie. And Ronnie was a wonderful dog, and I got him in 2018. And it was once again we were commuting, and Ronnie, unlike he's not a retriever, he was a Labrador, and I found Labradors to be a lot easier to handle. They're less highly strung, they're less fussy about food, and he had a sense of humor. Barkley was terribly serious. If any of you remember the television series Downton Abbey, you may recall the butler. There was a terribly dignified butler. I think his name was Carston. And that was Barkley. whereas my third dog, Ronnie, was a much more phlegmatic, laid-back dog with a bit of a sense of humor. He was more like Winnie the Pooh, but he was very, very competent, extraordinarily competent. He was an excellent, excellent guide dog. Didn't fly with him very often because it was becoming unpleasant to fly now with all the extra red tape. And so, sadly, last year, I had just taught him to walk from my home to our Rotary club when he contracted a liver disease, and it took him 6 weeks and he died. And I am now without a guide dog. And so I'm sitting in that horrible no man's land of being a guide dog owner without a guide dog. And so I'm still on the waiting list. You have no idea where you are on the list. But let me explain that. That's actually an important point here. The dogs are not off-the-shelf devices. The reason there's often a long time lag is because the association, and I'll tell you all about them just now, the associations, the guide dog associations, look at the individual very carefully. They look at the gait, which means the speed of their walking. They look at their temperament. They look at how busy you are. They look at where you live. They look at your age. They look at the kind of job you do. And so they pay a great deal of attention to the user. And then they marry or match the dog to the user rather than just pulling a dog off a shelf. And so because I walk very fast, and I'm quite demanding because I use my dogs well. I do a lot of interesting things with my dogs. There's no point giving me a lazy dog. And so you want a dog with a bit of spirit for someone like me. But if you're a little old lady and you have a dog, you don't want a dog with too much spirit. You actually want a dog that's a little bit lazy too. And so that's why I'm waiting for so long, because we're just waiting for the right dog. And I'm confident it'll come. So now let me tell you a little bit about association. So South Africa is in its 70th year of having a guide dog association. Literally in 1953, a woman called Gladys Evans came out from England with her dog, Sheena, and literally began South African Guide Dog Association. And we have a very well-run, very beautiful guide dog campus in Johannesburg. By the way, I forgot to mention, but for my sins, I'm actually on the board of the South African Guide Dog Association, and I'm the only blind person on that board, which is why I'm on the board. And so I'm very proud of the organization. And by the way, the organization doesn't just do dogs. It also is the campus for the College of Mobility Instruction. So all orientation mobility instructors in the country are actually trained at the Guide Dog campus as well. So the Guide Dog Association in our country was one of the 2 or 3 that founded a thing some years ago. We're talking a good 20 years ago. I forget the exact date, but it's the thing called the International Guide Dog Association. Yes, International Guide Dog Association, IGDA. And so that organization has 97 members from 34 countries. Just as a couple of useless facts, there are 22,939 working dogs, working guide dogs in the world who belong to the International Guide Dog Association. Just to give you an idea of scope, the Guide Dog Association, the International Guide Dog Associations, if you add all 97 organizations together, employ 5,500 people, utilizes 33,000 volunteers around the world. So we're talking about a considerable organization here and alignment of organizations. And that's the important next point, is that there needs to be a consistency in the curricula, in the way that dogs are trained. And that's why they created the International Guide Dog Association, so they could align their resources and they could communicate together and compare notes and to cooperate, very importantly, to cooperate amongst each other. And so what you get around the world, whether you get your dog from the enormous schools in California, or whether you get your dog from a brand new school in Croatia, you will get a consistency in training. And that training, and I'm getting to a point here that Kenny alluded to just now, that training is important because these dogs are meticulously trained in their manner, their discipline, their aggression or lack of it. The one thing you can almost always guarantee is that you will not find a great deal of aggression in guide dogs. Sometimes a guide dog user, because he misuses the guide dog or mistreats him, will unfortunately land up with something of an aggressive dog, which is very regrettable. But no guide dog in the world will pass or graduate to become a guide dog if he's aggressive. And so they taught things like to relieve themselves on command. They taught to hold it in for a long time if necessary. So they taught not to beg. They taught not to steal food. I don't know what happened to Gatsby that day. But as I said, he was naughty. And I mean, he was a lovely dog, make no mistake. As a pet, he was a terrific dog. He just didn't want to be a guide dog anymore. So what's very important here is that the bad press that has followed some guide dog stories and some service dog stories. By the way, service dogs are another story. We train service dogs as well in South Africa. And so we have autism support dogs. And we have service dogs, which go to people with mobility impairments and physical disabilities. Sometimes they actually help them walk. We have a woman who, she has a great big strong dog, and that she leans a little on the dog for stability because she has cerebral palsy. Alternatively, if you're in a wheelchair and you have a service dog, your dog will do useful things for you. It'll fetch your keys, pick up your cell phone when you drop it, put washing in the washing machine, open a door, open a cupboard, open a fridge, open the washing machine, take washing out of the washing machine. All sorts of clever little things like that, which are very handy. And of course, company. As I mentioned, also autism support dogs. We don't do it for adults for some reason, mostly children. There are organizations which train dogs for diabetes, and there are in fact dogs which also can be used for epilepsy, to identify epilepsy. But we don't, at South African Guide Dog Association, we don't train those two. But we do the service dogs, and we do the autism support dogs. If you look at our logo, if you look up the website of South African Guide Dog Association, you'll see our logo there clearly represents people in a white cane, people with a guide dog, person with a service dog, and an autism support dog. And so the service side of it, they belong to an organization called the International Working Dog Association. And that's a much broader organization. It includes police dogs and military support dogs and health support dogs and sniffer dogs and rescue dogs and service dogs of all descriptions. The bottom line is with all of these dogs is that they are all registered via their independent association, their actual, their country association company, if you like. They're all registered. Now, here's the problem. What we're seeing more and more now are people taking chances. And it really, really upsets me when this happens. And so you'll get somebody saying, no, he can fly with me, he's a service dog. Or no, I can bring him into this restaurant, he's a service dog. And very often they will fraudulently download a false certificate of certification. They will even be able to buy off the internet, you can buy a harness. None of which is, they're not certificated at all. They're not registered. And of course, they're not trained appropriately. And so there's been some horror stories all around the world where dogs have behaved badly, including fierce aggression. People have been bitten, other dogs have been bitten. And so we need reminding that the whole principle of guide dog is to assist people with disabilities, whether they have a physical disability, autism, or blind in this instance, in my instance. And when other people simply want to be selfish and bring their pets in and claim their service dogs, they bring the entire industry into some disrepute. And so organizations, particularly airports and airlines, are being made to make decisions now. And even when we say things like, but they're registered, it's registered, and the other dog isn't registered, it's actually quite a simple solution. And yet there's such an influx now of these fake dogs that it's made the whole game actually quite unpleasant. And it's very sad that and I call them selfish because they absolutely are. They are people simply wanting to cash in or ride on the piggyback on what they believe. They think we have an unfair advantage because we can take our dog into a restaurant. They fail to realize that I didn't bring that dog into the restaurant. He brought me into the restaurant. So to end, I think I've covered just about everything, and I'm happy for questions, but I want to tell you a little story about something that Barclay did for me one day. So one day, this is back in 2013, I was in town visiting a client, and I had failed to pay attention to the fact that we were having a strike, a multi-union strike, which invariably means a march through town. And sadly, very often those marches get out of hand and they can become violent and destructive. And I was right slap bang in the middle of town, and I could hear the marchers chanting, and I had completely forgotten it was happening that day. And so I said to my client, I better get out. And I know town extremely well. And so I took back ways around where I thought they weren't going to be. And I was very proud of myself with Barclay, because Barclay, by the way, I must just quickly interlude here. The dogs are taught routes. So if I said to the dog from my home, station, boy, station, he would literally, without me saying another word, take me to the station, because I've taught him that route, you see. However, if I want to go to a place he hasn't been to, and I know how to get there, because I've got a very good GPS and I've got a very good sense of direction. I've got a very good GPS in my head. And of course, I can use the one on my phone as well. I can tell the dog to go there, go left here, find straight. Okay, boy, go right here now. And he will do those things for me. So he's still stopping me from walking into poles and cars and people and walking into holes. So he's doing his job. But he doesn't necessarily know the route. Anyway, so I was finding my way, and I suddenly realized that the station where the train would be out of bounds because the marchers probably came by train. So I changed my mind and I took another route. And I walked down another road, thinking I was going to bypass the marchers. And I didn't realize this, but there was another bunch of them behind them. And I stepped off the pavement straight into probably several hundred chanting marchers. And it was an awesome experience because I got swept up in these people, you know, a mass of people, several hundred people, has a mass of its own. You know, it has an inexorable mass, and you swept along like a river. And I found myself being turned about. They paid me no attention at all. They paid the dog no attention at all. I was simply caught up in this maelstrom of people. And I quite literally lost time. I knew more or less where I was, but I couldn't have told you which side of the road I was on. And I knew that I'd been swept into at least one more road. Anyway, I told the dog loudly, station, boy, station. And he did the most extraordinary thing. He turned 180 degrees, and he's a big, powerful dog, he was, and he powered his way through the people. And in my mind, I thought he was aiming the wrong way, and I nearly corrected him. And something you learn in training is to trust the dog. Very often, the blind person thinks he knows better, and invariably that ends in tears. And so I trusted him, and I let him, and he took me what I thought was 180 degrees in the wrong direction, but it was actually the right direction. And I said, okay, we can't go to the station, I said to myself, because the marchers are there. So I guided him and I said, straight. And then I said to myself, I didn't say a word. And I said, I think I'm going to have to catch a My City bus, which means I'm going to have to go another kilometer beyond the station, across several more big roads, which he had never done that route. He'd literally never done that route. And I have no clue how he did it, because I got to a point where I knew where the bus station was more or less, but I couldn't have told you if it was left or right. And he'd certainly never been that way before. And he didn't hesitate. And he took me right there. And he took me right there. And he took me straight to the ticket office. And so he was a fine dog, Barclay, and he died in 2016, in June 2016. It was a great sadness. But I thought I would end with that little story. So up to you guys now, if you want to ask me any questions.
Thank you, Jeremy. They're always very interesting. I always learn from you, as I have again today. A little better understanding of guide dogs. And I wonder if situations have changed. You talked about the airlines, but I remember Jeremy Warner, who is another member of this club and was a hotel manager, said that he could never question if somebody came in with a dog, whether that dog was a service dog or not. Has it changed now that you have to show certification in situations like that?
Yeah, I mean, we all have a little card that we're given. I can't speak for the rest of the world, but I'd be very surprised if they don't all do something like this. So I have a little card that says, this is a registered guide dog. His name is Barclay or Ronnie or Gatsby, whatever his name is. And his master is, or his owner is Jeremy Opperman. And there's a little number there. And a telephone number, and you can phone. You can literally, off that card, they could phone the Guide Dog Association, and they would say, yep, Jeremy Opperman is one of our members, yep, and Ronnie is his dog. So you have that option. It also has a quotes one of our bylaws, one of our municipal bylaws, which states that this dog may go into a restaurant or in a food serving area, and he quotes that little bylaw. So what Jeremy Warner, I suppose, was referring to was that the ADA made explicit mention of service dogs and guide dogs, working dogs, and that they are in fact entitled to go into places. But I must tell you, all over the world, in the most sophisticated first world countries, guide dogs are still prevented from going into restaurants sometimes. And it's usually a security guard. It's usually a staff member who hasn't paid attention or didn't know or didn't read the manual or whatever. And many of us are assertive enough to to convince our way through, to argue our way through. But not everybody is assertive, and it can be very unpleasant, especially if with a family or with friends and you want to go into the restaurant and you're not allowed in through no good reason. And so it leaves a terribly bad taste in the mouth. So it's an unfortunate thing. And I mean, it happened last year in France, a very sophisticated first world country, and who have good regulation. And there was a huge outcry when this particular shop simply would not allow a dog in. And so I'm afraid it's the human factor. And one thing I must point out, something happened between 21 and 22. In other words, 2020 and 2022, of course, which was COVID. And what COVID did was it essentially shut down all the airlines in the world. As a result, they hemorrhaged staff. And then, of course, in 22 and 23, they started hiring the staff back slowly, and they lost an enormous amount of intellectual capital. So many staff, which had been previously well trained as meet and assist people, or as attendants of some description, and they've often gone now. And so very often you've got newer raw staff who simply haven't been trained appropriately. So COVID, unfortunately, has actually put a bit of a dent in the ideal here.
I certainly have more questions, but maybe other people do also, as we're down to the last 5 or 10 minutes of the meeting. Does anybody have a question for Jeremy?
Jeremy, it's John.
Hey, John.
One thing you might find of interest, the Royal National Institute for the Blind in the UK, their puppies actually all start with the same letter in each year. So when they name their dogs, they all go through.
Yeah, we do the same.
Yeah, it can land up with quite fun. And of course, they're actually in Shakespeare country, but yeah, they are. The Royal Leamington Spa is right alongside Stratford upon Avon. You've got the situation where it's not just the meet and greet people. It's also the people who are behind the desks who are not, who've been lost. And you get the ones. I just wanted to tell you one very short, funny story. A friend of mine, like yourself, RP, guide dog, went through. He never had a choice of which airline that he flew with. This dog always took him to the British Airways desk, because the British Airways people always had treats behind the desk for it. So he ended up flying that one. But the question for you is, have you tried flying international? Have you come across anything which occurs there? Or have you got any advice to people to flying international?
Yeah, I know several. I haven't had the opportunity. So the short answer is no. But I looked into it because I very nearly did fly internationally in 2020. It didn't come off in the end. So, and when I went to America in Christmas time, Ronnie was dead because I was actually going to take him. So I haven't myself, but I know a bit about it. Qantas is for instance, is a very good reputation. They certainly had before COVID. They're one of the sort of better, and they've got a whole policy about flying guide dogs internationally. The way it works is that nil per mouth, meaning no food, no water for 24 hours, and that you pretty much guarantee the dog's not going to make a mess in the plane. I don't know what airlines are better than others anymore, but I do know that Qantas led the game. And I tell you what is tricky. It's not so much the flying. It's the veterinary red tape that you have to jump through between countries. And if you get it slightly wrong on either side, they'll take the dog away. And I've seen that end in tears on both sides of the journey. Not me personally, but what happened to people. I've known a dog in Holland to be put in a kennel for a month simply because a vet in South Africa put the wrong date down of return. And I've seen exactly the same thing happen in South Africa for the same reason in Europe. So there's a lot of admin and a lot of red tape to fly with a dog. It's not an easy thing. Some countries simply don't allow you to. And some countries are quite cool with it, but you can only go for a short time. You can go to Holland, for instance, but no more than 2 weeks. I believe I can take the dog to America, but everybody seemed to have a different answer. So I've got to tell you, I was nervous about wanting to take my dog into one state because I couldn't get a straight answer. I must tell you, I absolutely could not get a straight answer. So I am a little nervous about flying internationally, but it can be done.
And you have to be careful as well these days when the laws change. When the UK left the EU,
yes,
the law about how you could transport animals, service dogs, guide dogs, epilepsy, diabetes ones across the border as to what can happen.
Quite right.
We've got a situation where technically a dog from Northern Ireland can't come down into Southern Ireland because Northern Ireland is UK, Southern Ireland is EU.
Europe.
special passports, tablets, and everything else.
Oh, good heavens. Thanks.
Yeah,
Any other questions?
Yeah, I have another question, and that's about the expense of having a dog.
Good point.
Do they cost money to get one? Obviously to maintain one, but I'm thinking about.
I must say, in doing my homework, one thing I forgot to look at was what is the difference around the world. Maybe John can say from a UK point of view, but in South Africa you don't pay for the dog at all. It's fully fundraised. The organization is a non-government organization. In fact, they don't, like in the UK, they don't like getting money from government. They get their money from civil, from society, people and companies sponsor. So we do the same here. So we have, our company, we have a big organization, and it's fully funded by charity. We pay nothing or very little, a small token sum. You pay also a token sum for the training, the 2 weeks training, far less than it's actually worth. Then you need to pay for the feeding of the dog, and you will get a slight discount from a vet for the upkeep or for the medical care of the dog. Many vets will give you a big discount, and so that's really the bottom line. You do need to find the food and pay for the food yourself, because there is a means test. If you can't afford to look after your dog, they don't want to give you a dog, which is, I can understand that. I really can. There are a few rules as well. The dog is an inside dog, not an outside dog. It lives inside, and they're very strict about that in my country. I can only assume it's the same in other places as well. So yeah, that's the answer, Ken. If you can afford to keep the dog, meaning the food and the odd vet thing, you've got to pay for your own flea medication for the vet, or for the dog, not the vet. Mind you, the vet's probably got fleas by this time too, after having dealt with dogs so often. But yeah, that's the story.
So the other question is, in the town I used to live in, there was a gentleman who was well known for his dog and him, but he was abusive to the dog, and that's why he was well known. Do they monitor that to make sure that the person with the guide dog is not abusive?
If you want somebody to complain, boy, mistreated dog, and that organization, that particular guide dog association, or in the States, you've also got Seeing Eye, somebody will have reported that. If you knew about it, then others knew about it, which means by almost certainly the association knew about it. And if that had happened in my country, the trainers, his original trainers, would have been on him very quickly and said, "What the hell are you doing?" And they would have given him a chance, possibly 2 chances, but they would have removed the dog. So yeah, if you break the rules, they're very strong about that.
Good to know. Is there any other questions? I have a million, but we can talk offline on that because we're at the end of the hour.
Sure.
Is there any other questions?
I'll just answer Jeremy on one thing. The only difference between what you do in South Africa and what happens in the UK and in Germany and in the Scandinavian countries is they actually pay the veterinary bills, the associations, and they give them that, but they also inspect once a year, and they specify what feed the dog must have. So they actually...
yeah, interesting. Okay. Yeah, I wish that was like that here, because when Ronnie fell ill, it was up to me. I had to pay for all the medicine. You can imagine acquiring a liver disease, John. You would appreciate this. It was very costly, and I had to foot that bill. But so that's the bottom line. I'm sorry, I obviously spoke too long. I'm sorry, Ken.
Fascinating everything you had to say. If there are no other questions, we will close the meeting for today. Our next meeting is on October 30th, and at that meeting we're going to celebrate Dyslexia Month. So looking forward to that. So thank you all for coming today. And Jeremy, if anybody needs to get in touch with you, how do they do that?
They could email me at jeremy@disabilitydesk.co.za. Jeremy, Jeremy, at disabilitydesk, one word, .co.za. If you're American, it's ZA.
And if you're Colombian, I forget what that is, but that's all right. I'm still learning that. So. Okay, so thank you all. I much appreciated. Rotary clubs used to have bells that they rang at the end of the meeting, but I got to get myself a bell so I can do that. So, but I'm a virtual bell, maybe I can do that. Okay, thank you all. Much appreciated. Thanks for coming, and hope to see you again. I'll be in touch. Take care.
Thank you.